Keith,
Yes, sir.
who's Keith? Who are you? What do you do?
Wow. How long do we have on today's podcast? I'm just kidding. No, man.
Take your time.
So, no, I mean, in terms of who I am, I have spent from a professional standpoint, and this doesn't define who I am, but it's a big part of, been a big part of my life is my professional career. I spent over 30 years in technology and management consulting and kind of either working in one field or the other, and a lot of times both, and the convergence of both. And I've loved every single minute of it. I wouldn't have changed one single thing. From my first job out of college which was with Apple. I'm back in the early 90s. Then going from there to my second job out of school, which was with Anderson Consulting, and learning, kind of the real management consulting best practices, management frameworks, et cetera. And really, that was kind of the foundation for me and my career for the things that I've done in building companies over the years, and building very successful management consulting practices with large, billion-dollar consulting firms, and a couple of successful exits out of companies, one that I started and one that I was a part of in a senior leadership role, not tech related, it was consumer goods related. So I've had a lot of experiences in corporate life for sure that have shaped me. And I will also just kind of share very briefly a lot of the experiences that I've had. I kind of leveraged that into, after my second successful exit with a company back in 2009, I decided I wanted to try and, change the world. So I ventured into nonprofit advocacy and worked and ran a couple of nonprofit organizations for a few years, in doing fundraising and so forth for causes that are still near and dear to my heart to this day, and learned a lot from some of the high net worth donors that I'm still friends with to this day. So I've accumulated a lot of knowledge and people and relationships over the years. So if I had to kind of define myself, it's kind of a combination of technologist, management consultant, just an acquirer of people and knowledge. And that's me, man. So I hope I did that justice for you.
You've done amazing job. I mean, as a viewer who's listening to this podcast, I hope you guys buckling up, because you're getting a raw knowledge from somebody who's been in so many
Right on.
businesses, a nonprofit, because that's such an important tool and
It
such an
is.
important experience to experience as an entrepreneur who's always been focused on profit, and now here we go. It's a different beast, right? You're talking
It
about.
is in many ways, yeah, because it's, obviously it's more mission focused. But I will say, and as someone who has started another venture here in a different time of my life, the experience of running both for profit and nonprofit organizations, there's a lot of similarities too, because at the end of the day, it is about building relationships with people. Right? Whether you are capital raising for a new venture or you're fundraising for a nonprofit cause, you still need to be able to interact positively with people and be able to build trust relationships and all that. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, going back and forth and into those two different fields. And when I coach new business owners, no matter what field that they're in, I stress to them that, the big takeaway that I like to give to entrepreneurs is focus on building relationships with your customers, with your partners, and your employees, your staff, because that's going to ultimately determine whether or not you're successful.
When I hear you saying that, like, build relationship, focus on building relationships, because when you're an entrepreneur, you don't know
Yeah.
where your next big investor will come from. It could be
Yeah.
sitting in the bar, for
Yeah.
crying out loud, or on the beach, but because who you are, an
Hmm.
individual of focusing on other people, good things will happen, right?
Yes. 100%.
That,
No,
that,
100%. And
Go
I think
ahead.
that's, one of the things that, that I've learned personally. And I didn't always know this, by the way. Something that I've had to learn in some ways the hard way is just to be genuine, no matter what the situation is. I know that sounds really like basic and fundamental and self-evident, but just to your point, where some people try and put on maybe a different persona or a different face or a different attitude depending on, what they're doing or who they're interacting with. Yeah, you adjust your approach a little bit depending on your audience. Yes, but there are people who try to be literally like a different person depending on their audience, and that just doesn't work. It doesn't work for very long. It's just not sustainable. And that's where you get into imposter syndrome and all that other stuff. One of the things that I try to, again, when I'm coaching entrepreneurs and people who are just starting out, be genuine, be yourself, because it's going to come through no matter what at some point. So might as well just embrace that, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever, right up front, and build a solid relationship built on, honesty and trust.
Yeah. People will fall in love with you for who you are,
Yeah,
not for who you wanna
exactly.
be.
Or they won't, and that's okay too.
Yeah,
Because, what
yeah.
you really want to avoid, and this happens with entrepreneurs who are seeking, capital, and they try to be somebody they're not, and they may be successful in securing that first, or, that seed round or that series A or whatever it is. And then when they kind of revert back to who they really are, then there's a disconnect in the expectations between the angel or the VC, whomever, and the entrepreneur who's now showing their true colors. Whoa, what happened? What happened to that person that
Right, right,
that I
right.
invested in? So, and I know we kind of went off the track there, but these are just things that I've observed over time, that the most successful people that I have personally had a chance to learn from, they're the same. They're the same no matter what situation they're in, whether it's a hedge fund manager who's got billions of dollars in assets under management, or a very successful commercial real estate developer, investor. They're the same, and they don't change. They don't change their principles. They don't try to be different people in front of different audiences. And that's, I think, interacting with those sorts of folks on a regular basis really showed me, again, that just be yourself, right? So,
When I was, looking to name my podcast channel, and the name of the podcast is Owner's Diary, right? AI
okay.
with shortcuts. Yeah, I my wife asked me, "Why are you wanting to name Owner's Diary?" Because I said, "There's a big difference between being an owner and being an a C-level executive," because what you just described, right, this is such a perfect example. And for listeners that want to become successful entrepreneurs eventually, right, I've noticed that it's so much easier for me to get in touch with an owner versus somebody at a high level, C-level executive or a manager, because entrepreneurs understand. You just said it. Just be you, treat other people, because you just don't know where the next opportunity will come from. And it's just who you are. It exudes of who you are.
That's exactly
And
right.
I love this. We're not going off track. This is an
Okay,
incredibly,
yeah, just like I said, I'm
incredible
gonna follow
point.
your lead, yeah, so, okay.
This is incredible point, Keith. I mean, I appreciate you for sharing that. It's such a incredible advice for future or soon to be amazing large entrepreneurs, right?
No, for
Because
sure.
sometimes you kind of tend to forget, right? Like where you came from, and
You
people
do.
change.
And look, I see this with a lot of younger entrepreneurs that I've worked with over the years. Right now, I'm focused a lot, pretty much exclusively in the construction space and
Yeah,
contracting space. And, I'm
yeah.
happy to share just kind of how I landed there. But there are a lot of younger guys who've never started businesses before. And for good or for not so good, there are a lot of influencers out there on YouTube and so forth that, say you should be this way, or you should do this, or you should do that. And some of these younger guys and women tend to pick up a lot of cues from those influencers, some of which are helpful, some of which are not. And so what
Do you
tends
have
to
an
happen is
example? Do you have an example?
I I do. I don't want to name names of influencers.
Maybe not info, but like an example of what kind of bad.
Yeah. So, I think that there are certainly some influencers who are kind of down the path of the bro code. We'll put it that way. Guys who are like, mega alpha personalities basically. And that approach might work for them, right? That approach doesn't work for everybody. To being the super alpha dog in every situation,
I
right?
understand. Yeah.
So you get impressionable guys, it's mostly guys who get impressioned by this, who try to adopt that persona, but that's not really who they are, right? They're
Mhm.
just basically mimicking what they've seen and heard off of the, podcasts or YouTube videos, etc. But that's not who they really are. And that creates a disconnect at some point, either initially or at some point down the line. They're not being their true selves. And then they start to get frustrated, and then they start going off the rails with their business because they're not operating as to who they are legitimately. They're just kind of picking up somebody else's persona. Does that make sense?
100%. I actually relate to you a lot to what you're saying.
Okay.
In my early stage in business, I had a mentor who was an extremely an alpha male, and I looked at his success and I thought, I gotta be like that. even though, yes, I'm a very direct person, that was not my strength. My strength, who I need to be, came later in life when I've built tons of relationships. My wife had to kind of point out to me, like, your strength of this, and that. It took me a while to recognize it, but when I recognized, I embraced it and I became who I am and I was comfortable in who I am versus trying to become. And I've noticed things start happening for me in business.
Exactly.
You know,
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, so I guess I will name one name, but it's a fictional name. So I do a lot of work with sales teams, business owners, and when I do sales coaching, a lot of times, especially younger guys who have seen Wolf of Wall Street, right? If you're familiar with that movie,
love that movie,
you
by the
know,
way. I'm not gonna lie. I love that movie.
no,
Sell me the
I
pen.
love that movie, and I love Leo DiCaprio and everything that he did with the Jordan Belfort character. I love that.
Absolutely.
But there are a lot of guys who look at that movie and go, "That's how I gotta be. I
That's
gotta,
right.
when I'm running my sales meeting or I'm trying to pitch to a customer, I gotta have that sort of mentality." And that's great for the movies, but as I often have to remind people that like to adopt that approach, you know, that didn't work out so well for Jordan Belfort in his career. There's the entertaining part, but then there's the back end of the movie where, and I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but that's a really good example of something that people kind of pick up on, especially in a sales or an entrepreneurial role. And it, again, I'm probably painting with a broad brush in terms of, younger entrepreneurs because it happens with older people too. Yeah.
You can point that, especially if you in the construction industry. Let's be
Yes.
honest. Construction industry is dumb. Depends on size of the businesses that you work with. If they're more on the smaller end, is that safe to say? Predominantly are in different cultures, right?
Yes, for sure.
And when you deal with the different cultures, you opening up a completely new way of doing business where you cannot be that, Wolf of Wall Street, just go me a dominant person and just try to just outwork everything with your presence. It
Yep.
just does not work
I'm
in
just I'm
different
just
cultures.
gonna force whatever it is I'm selling down, whatever they down that person's throat. Yeah, that it just doesn't work that way. And it probably did, or it probably was a little more successful that approach many years ago, right? But times have changed. Culture has changed a bit. And one of the reasons why I love focusing exclusively on the construction space and the contracting space is because that sector is probably the furthest behind in terms of adoption of technology and just kind of best practices in running business, right? So there's a lot of
Why is
opportunity
that,
here.
Keith?
Why is it? I just think it's a couple of reasons. First of all, in the contracting space, they're much smaller businesses. Number one, a lot of family-owned businesses, a lot of mom and pops, et cetera, which is all good. But you also have guys and women who have started those businesses that didn't have a lot of experience in
Owning a
corporate,
business.
yeah, owning a business, running a business, or even much corporate experience. You have a lot of people who came up through the ranks of, they may have been a roofer, a project manager, or on the roof doing installations, or they doing HVAC installations, etc. And they decided, you know what, I don't want to work for this other guy anymore. I'm going to start my own thing, right? And you see that a lot, which is fine. I love entrepreneurship for sure. But if you don't, the technical knowledge that you had as a roofer or an HVAC guy or landscaping or plumbing or whatever your trade is, that's all good, but that's not the skill set that you need to be successful in building and running a business, in building and running a successful team. Very different skill sets. So, what,
Whoa.
go
Whoa. I
ahead.
just heard something that
Uh
probably
oh.
shocks a lot
Did
of
I get myself in trouble there?
no, that's great. No, this is so powerful, right? Because it's very common when somebody is good in something, like personal trainer. They'll start a business because they love personal, and they think I'm going to start a business because I know how to code.
I'm
I
such a
know
great
how to
trainer.
help,
Yeah, right.
yeah,
Yep.
people to get a six pack. I know how to cut the grass, or they're skillful in one area, but that's
Hmm.
not what builds a successful business.
That is correct, sir. That's 100% correct. So we call that subject matter expertise, right? So, again, whether you're, like you say, a personal trainer, guy who's, excuse me, made a living, comfortable living, good living, being a personal training coach, or, we see this in fashion, we see this in tech, we see this in construction, all
Every
restaurants, even,
industry.
how many restaurants do you know that, a great chef, somebody who's a master in the kitchen,
All
that
the
you,
time.
you, you you think they're going to be uber successful and they're closed within, a year. right? Because the skill set, again, of running a business and that relationship building with customers, the relationship building with team members, that's very different. It is very different.
Understanding people, communicating with people, bringing out the best in people.
Hmm.
It's probably the most important skill as an entrepreneur you have to have. What is the other next best, absolutely important skill as an entrepreneur you gotta have?
So, as it relates to people, treating people the way you want to be treated is, again, it's one of those like fundamental no brainer sort of things, 100%. Add to that this idea of accountability. Now, accountability is a word that everybody loves to throw around, right? I'm going to hold that person accountable. I want accountability. The challenge is actually doing that, right? And going through the discipline of to what standard are you going to hold somebody accountable to,
And
right?
how?
And how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that consistently? And that is, again, being nice to people, which is kind of what you were talking about with the treating others the way you want to be treated, being nice, being courteous, being professional, that's all good. And you absolutely should do that. There are times when you need to hold someone accountable, again, based on the expectations that you've set with them and they've committed to with you, that you're going to have a difficult conversation, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs are not comfortable with
I
that.
think it's just in general, right? I know
Yeah, it's
people
a people thing. Yeah, it's not even just entrepreneurs. You're right, for
sometimes
sure.
we can even do it in our family, husband to wife, right? And
100%.
like,
No,
honey, you
that's
said you're gonna
exactly
do
right.
that. Don't just go
Yeah,
aggressively. Like, what's wrong with you?
yeah. No, exactly right. So, this idea of, again, just how you lead people through both inspiration, motivation, but also, sometimes holding them accountable to what they said that they were going to do.
Yeah.
That's the key, at least in my experience. And the entrepreneurs who can do that consistently usually succeed to whatever level they aspire to. The ones who can't do that successfully are the ones that go off the rails and fail. That's the whole thing about scaling, right? All entrepreneurs want to
Mm,
scale their business, but 2x, 3x, 10x, 20, whatever the X is. The only way you get there is through acquisition of people, right? Unless you plan on doing all the things yourself and being,
impossible.
yeah,
Impossible.
which is absolutely impossible, even with AI, by the way, which I'm a big fan of. I love AI, but that is not going to still do all the things that you need to do. And so having people that you can rely on and who are going to get the job done the way that you want them to consistently is the most important skill set, at least in my opinion, for entrepreneurs.
Incredible. I love it. Speaking of AI, you've worked in tech for years and fully embrace AI.
Yes, sir.
How do you see technology, especially AI, supporting the long-term mindset rather than replacing hard work?
So, I mean, AI is going to replace some hard work. It already has. And I'll give you an example, especially in my business or in my sector. AI helps us create content more quickly. It doesn't replace what I do or what members of my team do. It just helps us to do it faster, which ultimately means we can do more, take on more engagements, which is great. And I love that. But it does replace, a certain level of, let's say, copywriting or research, right? Or maybe junior level consultants who are coming in straight from college. AI could have some sort of impact on some of those sorts of roles and jobs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the technology, going back to the invention of cars and electricity, I mean, it always disrupts some existing, labor pool. And that's okay because we adapt.
Yep.
So I am a big fan of AI to not from the standpoint of replacing hard work, but how does it actually make what we do faster, easier, and so we can do more of the thing that we're getting paid to do. That's what I love, and I see a lot of promise in AI. Much like I've come up through multiple generations of tech, going back to the original .com stuff back in the late '90s when I was out in the Bay Area. I was literally ground zero, living in Napa and working in San Francisco, and I worked with a lot of tech companies, early stage tech companies back in the day. Went through the whole .com boom and bust, and so I've seen a lot of tech promises and excitement and so forth, and it usually lives up close to the promise, doesn't quite get there, and that's okay. And I think AI is kind of on the similar trajectory. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of excitement,
Yeah.
There's a lot of nervousness also. At the end of the day, I think it's going to make an impact for sure, but I don't think it's going to disrupt everything like some of the doom scrollers would say. We'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
The leaders and the owners that leverage AI to get the product to the market faster, or for like content creation or certain things that can be replaced by technology, the ones that know how to leverage faster will get more quality time during the day to do actually the prospecting, the developing relationship assets of
100%.
being and growing. It certainly will separate those individuals a lot faster. I mean,
Percent. You look at look at Amazon as an example of kind of the previous generation of tech. Amazon for many years they were known for selling products online, right? That's what they did. I mean, obviously
books,
that's what they still do.
books.
Books,
Yeah,
right? That's how they started. They didn't really start to disrupt a lot of stuff until they mastered logistics.
absolutely.
Getting whatever was ordered online, books or whatever, to somebody's hands within like
2
2 days.
days. Yeah,
And
yeah,
now,
yeah.
it's almost like same day. I mean, it's incredible what they've done on the logistics side, which is, yeah, there's a lot of tech involved with that. But at the end of the day, it's getting a product from the warehouse or the distribution center into your hands. And once they mastered that, that's really when, everything blew up. And so I think AI is going to be the same thing.
That's right,
It's
that's right.
going
Ooh,
to,
that's a great example.
yeah. So yeah, it's off the top of my head. That's probably the one that jumps off at most there.
That's a tremendous example. You've said most problems aren't technology problems, right? They're people problems. How do
Yes.
you see AI leaders become better coaches and decision makers instead of just working faster?
Yeah, so I think that AI, I think, provides the opportunity for up and coming leaders, or leaders who just need to maybe get some new ideas, different approaches to managing people. I think AI can provide some helpful advice for those individuals in leadership roles to be better coaches for their teams. Now, that's two things have to happen. Number one, that leader has to be inquisitive enough or curious enough
Curious.
or open to the idea that their one way they've been doing it, isn't maybe the best way. So there's that part. Then there's the other part, which I think is just as significant a challenge, which is, okay, once you have the information, because I mean, there's a ton of management and leadership books out there and online resources that somebody could go buy, or they could go take a class or whatever. So the challenge is taking that information wherever you get it from, including AI, and actually doing something,
Yeah, yeah,
applying
yeah.
it, taking action and doing
Right.
it consistently and making that a habit. That's the much more significant challenge for sure. And I know that because I deal with that on a daily basis with my clients.
The advice for future entrepreneurs. One mindset shift they need to adopt today if they want to win long term.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about relationships in this podcast. And so if I were an entrepreneur, if I was, younger and, less experienced, et cetera, I would really do a hard look internally at my current relationships. Who do I know? Who do I trust? If you've got a LinkedIn profile, take a look at the people that you're connected to on LinkedIn. How strong are those connections? Right? Can you get referrals from those people? Can you get advice from those people? Do you have a mentor yourself? And I think when you kind of do that self assessment, I know that sounds really touchy feely,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's super helpful because when you go down the path of being an entrepreneur, you're going to need to lean on people. You are. I mean, you're the rainmaker, you're the one who's creating this business and so forth, but you are going to have to lean on other people to pull in expertise that you don't have. So how strong are those relationships? And if you if you do that self-assessment and you find that, you know what, maybe I don't really have as strong relationships as I think I do, work on that. You reach out to people, go get a cup of coffee or a cocktail or dinner, and just, kind of form those relationships, make them strong, strategic relationships. People are going to bring value to you, and then jump in, because I think that is super helpful for anybody who, no matter what a business you're trying to do, whether a restaurant, creating a tech firm, starting a new construction company, really, really have strong relationships when you get started.